Good morning, friends. Today I'm going to be taking you with me to go look at a well from 1958, and we're going to conduct a yield on it. Now, this yield's going to be a little bit more important than what you would probably expect, and that's because we're in Baltimore County, where they have actual regulations on it. Love it. Makes it where you know exactly what you're supposed to do and how to do it. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to take you with me while we look at this well. We evaluate, is it doing what it's supposed to do? Is the pump working? Pressure tank looks good, all that good stuff. But I'm going to explain how does a well yield work and then what makes Baltimore County so special. So let's go ahead, get to that property, see what we're working with, and then we'll figure out if it's playing nice or not. So this is what we're looking at for our first impression. We have our water line coming through the wall over here. Somewhere on that side of the house is going to be the well. I didn't see it at grade, so now we get to play the fun game of where are you hiding? We see that we have our water line come into a shutoff valve that should not be there. Filter should not be there, and another shutoff valve that also should not be there prior to our check valve, and then our pressure tank assembly off into the rest of the house. So you may be wondering, why don't you want to have any kind of treatment before your pressure switch? Well, the answer is very simple. If you have any kind of restriction point prior to the pressure switch, you run the risk of that switch turning on and water not being able to adequately get to the pressure tank, which causes undue stress on the plumbing system as well as the well pump. Now you can make an argument, oh yeah, you're only going to turn that off when you're changing the filter. Okay, well, what if you don't know? What if you sell the house to somebody who doesn't know that? Or what if that filter clogs? In Maryland, when you're licensed, you need to know all treatment needs to be after the pressure switch. And the reason why is the pressure switch is what turns the pump on and off. And how that works is based off the spring in the back of it. As the pressure in the tank drops or the pressure in the plumbing drops, for example, this is a 40-60 switch, the pump will engage at 40 psi, and then when it gets to 60 psi, the pump will disengage. So it's constantly giving and taking as need be. So whenever you turn on a kitchen sink, it may not immediately click the pump on. But after a few minutes of running or a few seconds of running, depending on how fast you're discharging or where the cycle was, the pump might engage, which then will compress the air in the pressure tank back to 60 psi, and it does its normal thing. If you have a restriction point, that pressure tank may not fill up fast enough in order to give the pump enough time to basically dissipate that buildup of pressure behind it. So you could accidentally overpressurize the system, where if the filter's clogged up partially, you might have 90 psi behind it and 40 psi after it. And so if you end up having the switch turn off, you might have excessive stored pressure behind the filter, meaning once the pressure eventually equalizes, you could have issues with the pressure relief valve, leaks, etc. in your rest of your plumbing in the house. So not a good idea. Whenever you see something like that, you gotta switch it up. The main thing you're probably trying to figure out though is, what is a Baltimore County well yield? Now, in the state of Maryland, whenever you're buying a house, selling a house, or building a house, the state regulates that a well must produce 1 gallon per minute or more, right? A well yield is basically how you figure out what the well is capable of doing. So if you think about the well like a straw and your aquifer like a cup, basically you want to drain the cup and see how fast the water comes in. Now, how do you do this? Baltimore County specifies there's 2 ways to test a well, especially if you have a pre-existing well or a new build. If it's a new build, the structure's not there, you do it directly from the wellhead. You bring a pump, put it down the hole, throw all the stuff out of the hole, and see what you get. If the house is already built and you have a pressure tank, it says that you can connect to the manifold, which is the T-assembly. And then you run the hose outside, do the same thing. Every 15 minutes, you fill a 5-gallon bucket. You run it for at least 3 hours, up to 6, depending on what your yield rate is. So all well yields will start high, fall down, plateau. Maryland wants you to start 8.0 or higher so we can get an adequate drawdown in the well column, but higher you can start. If you start at 12, great, whatever, but you can't start at 2. If you start at 2, you're not doing a well yield. So you're gonna run that hose for 3 hours. Every 15 minutes, you're gonna fill a 5-gallon bucket and you're gonna time it. And you're gonna see how fast that water's discharging. And then you're gonna put it on a chart and you'll see that it's like 10, 10, 10, 8, 7, 6, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. And basically what that tells us is that our yield is 5 and all of the other numbers prior to was our reserve. That's how much water is just readily available. The reserve is basically something that you want to get rid of when you're doing a well yield because it can cloud some of your judgment. That's why if you have a deep well with a good reserve and you start your well yield at 2 gallons per minute, you may make that well look better than it actually is. Because if you're only pumping at 2 gallons a minute, but you have 500 gallons of reserve, you might be able to make that well look passable, even though it might actually be a 1 gallon per minute or less well. So that's why it's important to start it as high as you can. With Baltimore County, not only do you have to start as high as you can and run it for at least 3 hours, but there is a chance you might have to run it for 6. Now, in the county, what differentiates a 3 versus a 6-hour well yield is it consistent and is it over 4 gallons per minute? So we've already discussed, you got to start high, drain the reserve, and then once you hit your plateau, that's your yield. Now, if the water's kind of going up and down, maybe you're getting 6 gallons, 5 gallons, 2 gallons, back to 8 gallons, back down to 6, that's inconsistent. Now, what's happening is you're getting some surging in the water based off of air, and all you got to do is just back pressure it and get it to balance out. But if you have a consistent flow after you've depleted the reserve and it's over 4.0, you're done, right? If it's 3.9, you have to go 6 hours. I think it's kind of silly to do it that way, but that's the way the rule's written. If you're sub 4 gallons per minute, you're going 6 hours. And the purpose of that is to basically guarantee that that yield is the yield. The reason why, let's say you have a 1,000-foot well. I've had plenty of houses with a 1,000-foot well that took 5 hours to get the yield from that test. For example, the deepest well that I've ever worked on was 1,367 feet. That took forever to get down to the yield. It took 5 hours and 45 minutes to get to 1 gallon per minute. And you might be thinking, well, 1 gallon per minute, that's not a whole lot. Well, actually, yeah, that's still perfectly fine because it was full bore as fast as it could go for 5 3/4 of an hour. That's a long time of running that well before you even get close to the yield. Now, if we were just doing a normal 3-hour well yield, you may not actually have noticed that that was going to be your yield. You might have said, oh, it's 7 gallons per minute instead of 1. But the problem is the chart would have shown that the water level kept falling down and down and down and down, and it never truly plateaued. When the water level plateaus, that is your yield, right? So you have to run it for a while to exhaust the reserve to get to the yield. And if you don't run it long enough, it doesn't really tell you what's going on, right? So you'll see a lot of people will run a well for about an hour. It's not a problem, but it's not a yield, right? So a 1-hour flow test is just to see, does the pump work? Does the pressure tank work? Is it adequately producing enough water for you to not notice any issues? Because realistically speaking, as a homeowner, how often are you going to run that water longer than an hour? In practice, you're probably not going to be running it that long, right? You might do 20 minutes here, 30 minutes there, but the chances of you running it longer than an hour, unless you're filling a pool or running a pressure washer, are pretty low. And at that point, knowing what your yield is really important. So if you're going to be topping up your pool, if you've got an hour's worth of water before you get to 1 gallon per minute, you have to know how much water you have, otherwise you're going to run into problems with the pump. So if you're topping up a pool, yeah, it might only be an inch or two, but that's a lot of water for a 20-foot pool, right? So if you need to put 1,800 gallons of water in there, but you only have 200 gallons of water before you get to 1 gallon per minute, you're going to run out of water. The pump's going to stop pumping water, and then now you're going to start running into some problems, mechanically speaking, and you run the risk of that pump burning up. So the purpose of this test for a Baltimore County well yield is to make sure that the well and the equipment that is transferring with the property or being installed on the property is capable of supporting a normal family. Now, Baltimore County is the only county in the state that has the regulation that anytime you sell a house, you have to do the test. Every other county, there is no such rule, which is why if you go to Anne Arundel County, you can run the well for an hour and it's still considered satisfactory. But remember, the 1-hour test is not a yield. It's just a flow test to say, hey, is it working or is it not working? Obviously, there are workarounds, right? So like if you can't get somebody to do the test, or if you're on a tight timeline or it's a competitive offer, obviously you can basically waive your ability to do this test in Baltimore County, but it does come with some risk, right? So when you're doing the test in Baltimore County, the homeowner that currently owns the house is responsible if that well is adequate for the property sale. So if you waive that right, now you as the buyer take on that liability, and if that well fails for whatever reason in 3 months, that's on you, right? So this is a long way of explaining how well yields work, but essentially whenever you get your system set up, you want to have them hook up a hose at the pressure tank or in the well itself. Now, if you already have the house, especially if it's occupied, doing the test directly from the wellhead is going to make it to where you have to chlorinate the well, and you're not going to have water for about a day, right? Or more, depending on how much chlorine they have to put into that well. That is very tedious and annoying. Doing it from the pressure tank keeps everything as a closed loop, so you can do your test, and when you're done, nothing changes for the homeowner beyond, hey, you might want to wait a little bit before you turn on the water and start using it in a normal use case, right? So when you do these tests, it's important that they are licensed and they know what they're doing. But Baltimore County has a rule book. They have a document. It's about 30-something pages long. And what they've done is they've gone ahead and they detailed exactly how wells work, especially in the Piedmont range. And they explain exactly how the test is supposed to be done and what the person's supposed to be looking for. And the benefit of this is you as the consumer, the person watching this right now with me, is able to tell what's going on before they even show up for the inspection. And if the inspector is not doing it the right way, call him out on it, right? That's his license. He's the one that should know better, not you. But being an informed homeowner, being an informed purchaser, I think is very valuable for everybody. So hopefully you gained some value out of this conversation. If you did, hit that like button for me, hit subscribe. I have more videos posted every day, and I've got videos covering all sorts of topics from wells, septic systems, home ownership, DIY projects. If you like that sort of thing, check out my channel, and I look forward to talking to you guys tomorrow.